This is Charlotte Talks. I'm Mike Collins on the Local News Roundup. No rain for about a month, and then the deluge. And with it, flooding. Nearly 100 homes on Mountain Island Lake suffered damage. Charlotte City Council approves a $2.6 billion budget for the next fiscal year. We're going to see some turnover in City Council in the next election as several members decide not to run again. And Charlotte's historic Excelsior Club may get a reprieve from the wrecking ball. Our roundtable of reporters is ready to detail those and other stories, and those reporters include Steve Harrison from WFAE News. Welcome back.
Thanks, Mike.
Glenn Wilkins is editor-publisher of QCityMetro.com. Good to see you.
Good morning.
And we welcome Danielle Shemtab for the first time. She is growth and development reporter for the Charlotte Observer. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning.
Nice to have you with us. We're all on the radio. If that's not enough, you can watch us on Facebook Live. And we begin this hour with a look at the weather that brought all that rain and flooding and the early morning temperatures this morning, which are really cool. And for information on that, we turn to NBC Charlotte Chief Meteorologist Brad Panovich. Good morning, Brad. Welcome.
Good morning. How are you doing?
I'm great. So it was 49 degrees this morning. That's a record, isn't it?
Yeah, it shattered the record, Mike. The old record was 53 degrees set back in 1903. And not only that, that's the first time we've been in the 40s in the month of June since the year 2000. And it's a rarity. We've only done that 10 times in our 140-year record book. So a rare treat in the Carolinas in June to see temperatures in the upper 40s. So it really was nice. Actually, I had my windows open this morning.
How long can that last?
One more night. We're going to have another cool night tonight, and today's going to be beautiful. It's going to be up around 79, 80 degrees, and the key part here is no humidity. I think that's what makes it feel so good. So very low humidity for this time of year.
So that's the good news. The bad news is the flooding, and last weekend a lot of North Carolina and certainly the Charlotte region were inundated with rain. How much rain fell in our area?
Well, in the Charlotte area, actually, not as much as what happened upstream. We had about 2 to 3 inches across the Charlotte area, a couple spots closer to 4 to 5 over the weekend. And most of that was spread out over the Friday, Saturday, Sunday, even early Monday timeframe. But what happened was upstream, up near the Hickory area, the Unifor area, where Caldwell, Burke, Alexander, and Catawba County all come together there, they saw anywhere from 6 to 14 inches of rain, and most of that fell in about a 12 to 24-hour period, Saturday night into Sunday, and that's where the problems really started, Mike.
Yeah, all that water has to flow downstream. So have we seen the end of the flooding here, or are we to anticipate more to come as that water comes through the system?
The good news is the flooding's pretty much over. The lakes are still running extremely high. The problem with where that water fell, it could not have been a more I would say great spot for flooding, but bad spot for people that experience it, because that is exactly in the headwaters of the Catawba River. All that water went directly into Lake James, Lake Hickory, Lake Rhodus, and those are narrow lakes up there. And so that water has to come downstream really quickly. So a lot of that came down into Lake Norman and then quickly had to be released down into Mountain Island Lake and then down to along the Catawba near Riverside Drive. And that's where the problems happened, because the water came up about 6 or 7 feet in the matter of hours instead of days.
Yeah, we experienced flooding in parts of Mecklenburg, Catawba, Caldwell, and Gaston counties, but was the worst of it along Riverside Drive? Is that the worst of it?
In Mecklenburg County, for sure. I mean, that's where the homes were impacted. Now, Mountain Island Lake saw a lot of damage, but it was mainly to boats and docks, not people's homes. So Riverside Drive, probably the worst flooding I've seen, Mike, since 2004 when Francis came through here. They get floods down there about every 10 years or so, but this was even high for that area because the water made it across the street and flooded homes that are actually off the river a little bit, up to the second floor. So some of the folks that lived down there, I was down there and talked to them, and they lived there since the 60s and 70s and said it was the worst they had ever seen. And since I was down there in 2004 to see the Francis flooding, I was shocked how high that water got.
On Sunday night, the people in the Riverside Drive area were told to expect flooding, but they were not told, I understand, that the floodgates had been opened on, I guess it was Lake Norman, to protect the integrity of the dams. And some are now saying that Duke Energy mismanaged the flow of water down that chain of the 11 lakes that they manage. Is that a fair assessment, or did they simply do what they had to do in the face of all that rain?
I'll be very diplomatic. It's a little bit of both, actually, because I think the one thing you can kind of put on Duke a little bit is the lack of communication and planning. We knew this rain was coming, several days ahead of time. So making room for the water was something they could have done. And also, once the water started coming downstream, I think the communication, and a lot of the folks really commented to me about this, was they just didn't know that it was going to get this high. So the lack of communication. But what a lot of people don't understand, and you mentioned it correctly, is that the Lake Norman Dam can't have really high water up against it. I think a lot of folks think that, they save the Lake Norman, all the wealthy people on Lake Norman get saved and the people downstream kind of have to have the water. It's not that simple, because the Lake Norman Dam, the water never gets above a full pond up there, because the way the dam is constructed, you actually can't have water go over the dam there, or the gates can't physically open anymore. So they have to keep it really low. It's kind of the way the dam is built and organized. There's no spillway. So they have to let the water out immediately. And unfortunately, that means high water in Mountain Lake, which does have a spillway that flows down into the Catawba. So it's more a function of how the dam system works than them deliberately doing it that way.
And in fact, the water level at Mountain Island Lake reached the second highest level in its history. Donald McGuire's neighborhood near Mountain Island Lake was among those hit by the flooding.
I saw water coming up to my house and all kinds of boat, canoes, and I seen decks going down the stream, and I left out at 1:30 this morning, and water was up above my waist.
So is that area prone to flooding under normal circumstances, or is it just an extraordinary events like the one we experienced last weekend?
Mountain Island Lake gets rapid water rises a lot, but that was extreme for them. As you mentioned, that's the highest they had ever been. And the last time the water was that high was the 1940s, and a lot of the dams upstream weren't even there. So, that is very rare to see the water get to basically almost 107. That's I never seen it go above like 104 or 105. So to see it go up even higher, and I think what caught people off guard was the speed. One of the guys I talked to said, he left for church in the morning and there was no issue. They come home and water's coming up and they could kind of see it. And then by dinner time, the water's at like their back door. They had just never seen the water come up so rapidly. And I think that's what really caught a lot of people off guard. You expect lake and river flooding that you're going to have a couple days. This came up almost like a flash flood, which is very rare on the lakes.
You've said that up in Hickory, based on rain gauge reports of 8 to 14 inches in 3 days. That puts this rainfall event anywhere from a 100 to a 1,000-year rainfall event.
Yeah.
Put that into perspective. Maybe that is the perspective. I don't know. That just sounds amazing to me.
Yeah, you hear those numbers a lot, and there's two things. There's what we have, 100-year floods, you've heard that term, and there's 100-year rainfall events. Now, 100-year floods change all the time because that's based on the amount of water flowing through a basin, a river basin. And construction and changes to the basin can adjust the 100-year flood number all the time. But rainfall rates is strictly the amount of rain falling from the sky for that longitude and latitude. So to see that much rain fall in such a short period of time, would have a recurrence frequency of about 1,000 years. Now, that seems like it should only happen every 1,000 years, but in theory, statistically, just like a 100-year flood can happen. There's a 1% chance of that happening every year. Same thing with a 1,000-year event. There's a 0.1% chance of that happening every year. So while it sounds crazy to see those numbers, it's actually statistically possible every year. It's just a very minute chance. So to see that happen over an area of the Unifor region, it's just something you don't normally expect, that much water to fall that quickly.
You may not be able to answer this question, but I'm assuming that somebody somewhere is keeping track of all this statistically. But as we experience what scientists say we're going through, which is climate change, is this happening more often, or are we just hearing about it, or is it that we now have the technology on television to cover every storm and event that happens, and so we're seeing more of it? Can you attribute what happened here last weekend to climate change?
This individual event, it's hard to say, Mike, but the number of events like this, the trend in heavy rainfall events is going up, and it's easily tied to climate change. If one of the weather events that's most easily attributed to climate change, especially in our area, are these heavy rainfall events. When the atmosphere warms, it can hold much more moisture. And one of the ways that we kind of measure this is a parameter. It's a weird word that we use. It's called precipitable water. It's how much moisture is in the atmosphere that's available for precipitation, how much to rain. Think of it as like the sponge. How full is the sponge of water? And if you squeeze it, how much can you get out? Well, in the last 5 or 6 years over the Carolinas, going back to Joaquin and Matthew and Florence and this event, the amount of precipitable water that's been over us has been at record levels. I've never seen that much moisture in the atmosphere. And that's something you can easily tie back to climate change. And I think in the Carolinas, that will be one of the biggest impacts we see from climate change. Sure, we are warming here, not as much as other parts of the country, but one of the biggest impacts we are going to see are events like this. Heavy rainfall events are certainly increasing in our area.
Invest in stilts.
Yes, or
Yes.
flood insurance.
Or
I'm a
flood.
big fan. And here's a stat I think that will blow people's minds. People think of these long, I don't have a very high chance of flooding. Well, if you live in a 100-year floodplain, which means, there's a 1% chance of your house flooding every year, Mike. If you have a 30-year mortgage, that means there's a 26% chance that your house is going to flood at some time during your mortgage. Now, fire, which most people have insurance for fires, the chance of your house burning down is like less than 5%. So there's actually statistically a higher chance your house will flood than catch fire, but very few people buy flood insurance. So if there's one thing I could tell you, buy flood insurance because your normal homeowner's insurance will not cover flooding.
Brad Panovich is chief meteorologist at WCNC-TV NBC Charlotte. He joins us periodically to fill us in on extraordinary weather events, which this last weekend we experienced, I suppose. Brad, thank you for being with us. I appreciate it.
You're welcome anytime, Mike.
And Brad joined us via Skype. Also with us I have to say, where this is Charlotte Talks on WFAE. Also with us in the studio, we have three of our erstwhile reporters, Steve Harrison from WFAE News, Glenn Berkins from QCityMetro.com, and Danielle Shemtab from the Charlotte Observer. We only have a couple of seconds here, but let's launch into the city budget because on Monday night, City Council approved unanimously a $2.6 billion budget for the next fiscal year. There were no surprises, right? It was approved just as it was proposed.
That's right. And, when you said a unanimous vote, that means, of course, the two Republicans voted for it, and that means there was no property tax increase, because if there is, historically, they will vote no. The budget, even though they rolled back the property tax to this revenue neutral rate, the budget still grows by 5% because there's so much growth happening in the city, and they get new money from new buildings and sales tax. So the city still had a lot of money to do new things.
Maybe you can give me a good answer to this question, because I had Marcus Jones on this show twice in the last 2 months talking about that fact, that we can still grow the budget by 5% and keep taxes revenue neutral. When we used to have Harry Jones, who was the county manager on this program, he would always explain rises in property taxes because of growth. He would point to growth and say, well, there's always a lag time between what we're bringing in tax dollars and what we have to put out in terms of expanding infrastructure. Marcus Jones is saying the opposite. Danielle, you cover growth and development. Maybe I'll let you jump in here. How do you explain, or Steve, jump in here and tell me, how do you explain this difference in explanation?
Well, the tax base has grown so much because the last revaluation was in 2011.
Right.
So most areas of the city, very, very, very few saw property value declines. And you look at the average increase, and even with a revenue neutral rate, you might not see your taxes go up if you only saw, say, 20, 30%, which was below the median increase for residential property, but you would see an increase in a lot of areas near uptown where people live in, like in Noda and the areas that are really changing really rapidly. Some of those areas had 200% increases.
Danielle Shemtab is with the Charlotte Observer. We're going to come back and talk more about the city budget that passed on Monday night. We'll also talk about turnover on city council and more when we come back. It's Charlotte Talks on WFAE.
web ping that you heard. Thanks to that contributor for making that big contribution. Are there more people out there who can give at that level? Are there people who can give at $50 a month, $100 per month? Every contribution is important to WFAE. If you can give a little bit more right now, help us get to the finish of this fundraising campaign that much faster, please do give us a call at 704-549-9000 or contribute online at WFAE.org. Whether it's $5 per month, or $500, we've got some type of special thank you gift that we would love to send you as a token of our appreciation. And today, The potential last day of the fundraising campaign might also be the last chance for you to get your name into the raffle for that $2,000 Lowe's gift card that Megan will be pulling the winner of very soon.
If you've been listening to this campaign, you know that we are raffling off a $2,000 gift card to Lowe's. Think about all of the summer to-do list items you could get knocked off with a $2,000 Lowe's gift card. One person is going to win this gift card. The only way to get your name in the running is with your gift to WFAE right now. 704-549-9000.
$61,122 away from the successful end of this fundraising campaign. What portion of that can you contribute right now? Waiting for the first phone call of this fundraising break. The phone lines stay open during the show if you're waiting to call.
It's Charlotte Talks on Listener Funded, 90.7 WFAE and 90.3 WFHE. I'm Mike Collins. It's the Local News Roundup. Steve Harrison is here from WFAE News. Danielle Shemtab is with us from the Charlotte Observer. And Glenn Berkins is editor and publisher of Q City Metro. As we all know, because the mayor and the city manager were on this program earlier this week, the city council unanimously approved a $2.6 billion budget on Monday night, which is revenue neutral, which we'll talk about in a second, and it also increases spending by what? How much, Steve?
About 5%. That's
5%.
Right.
Mayor Vialiles, as I said, was on this program earlier this week. She said the budget accomplishes the goals the council set out at the beginning of the budget process.
We were going to try to have a budget that was revenue neutral, that would not increase taxes, and in fact that we would try to make it possible so that more people could live in our city, that we would actually have more jobs for people to be in, and that we would try to get that done. And I think this budget really reflects all of those conversations, and we achieve those two goals.
So she mentioned the budget is revenue neutral. This is the first budget that takes into consideration these new property valuations, which by law have to be done periodically. You reported, Steve, that even at a revenue neutral rate, some property owners are going to be paying more property taxes. Why?
So kind of like Danielle said, we talked about earlier, if you live in Uptown or near Uptown in these fast-growing neighborhoods, your property values have gone way up, and there's no way the city can just have one property tax rate. They cannot set them for different neighborhoods. So a lot of people in South Charlotte in really wealthy neighborhoods pay a lot in taxes, but they may see their city tax bill actually go down, while other neighborhoods are going to pick up the slack.
And that's just the city tax bill. There's a property tax bill, and there's a county property tax bill, and the county is not staying revenue neutral. So in all likelihood, anybody who owns property is going to see those taxes go up. You report, Steve, that city taxes will go up about $9 a month on a house valued at $350,000. When you add in the county taxes, any idea what that might cost a person?
Actually, the numbers, right, I can't think of them at the exact moment, but yeah, I think that's an important thing to remember is that we'll talk on this program and we'll write stories about city taxes versus county taxes, but when you pay your mortgage, it's all the same. Right. It's all rolled in together. So I think the main takeaway is a lot of people are going to pay more.
Okay.
So the combined rate, I remember this because I've written it so many times, around 96.5, 0.965, but it's, 96.5 cents per $100 of assessed value. That's a very jargony way to say it, right. But essentially you can use that to multiply, with your property value. A lot of, like Steve was saying, a lot of the areas, and some of the explanation behind that is because in South Charlotte versus these fast-growing areas, it's not that, obviously the property values are very high, but the growth in the property values was not as much of a percentage increase as it was in these neighborhoods that have changed. Remember 2011, the last revaluation, we were still in the housing market crisis.
Right. So has the period for appealing your new valuation ended? Has that ended? Because the tax bills are coming in July.
Yes, it has.
Okay. The new budget also has money for affordable housing from the bonds that we passed last November. In fact, $50 million in bonds passed last November. Also money coming in from the private sector. That includes $6.4 million for the city to invest in old apartment complexes to renovate them and keep them affordable. Does the city intend to own and operate these apartment complexes? How is that going to work?
They've only done one of these deals. They did it in an apartment complex in East Charlotte, and the way they did that was they helped a developer purchase it and do the renovations and basically gave them a subsidy. So that appears to be the intent, and that's kind of how they've approached the affordable housing issue with, subsidizing new units or subsidizing the renovation of older units.
And I was just going to say the idea is that in the past, the whole strategy has been to build new apartment complexes. So you might build 50 new units somewhere, but at the same time you do that, an older complex gets sold to a new developer. They fix it up, and you gain 30 units over here, and you lose 30. And so this new strategy is to try and hold on to this affordable housing that already exists.
That's right. One of the other ways they're looking to help affordable housing is the aging in place program. I think they committed $750,000 to that in this budget. I believe there was $750,000 in the previous budget, and that is to help older residents, seniors who've seen their property values rise, and thus their property tax bill stay in those houses and not be forced out of those homes because they can no longer afford the taxes.
City Council is also going to see some turnover. We had a big changeover in City Council during the last City Council election, and the Young Turks all came in. I think that's how we dubbed them back then. They're now old. But we're going to see a lot of turnover because there are several current members that have decided not to run, and one, Lawana Mayfield, has decided to give up her district seat to run at large. Glenn, you reported on Justin Harlow from District 2. He was one of the newcomers just under 2 years ago. Why is he moving on?
Well, he has a thriving dental practice. He's going to join part of a larger group of dentists, as we've seen in the healthcare industry in general. There are very few private doctors out there anymore. They've all pretty much joined groups. He was telling me that is happening as well in dentistry, though it's just starting, and he feels he needs more time and energy to devote to building that business. He says he wants to come back into politics at some point, but right now he says he needs to step down. He's going to be one of three new, that district, it will be one of three districts that will have new representation on our new... 2, 3, and 4. 2, 3, and 4. Mm-hmm. As you mentioned, Lawana Mayfield, she's giving up her district seat to run at large. We've talked about Justin Harlow and Greg Phelps in District 4. He has announced that he's not going to seek re-election, and the filing season is still in front of us. So.
Lawana Mayfield has made a lot of headlines in the last year for some of the things that she said or tweeted. Does that help or hurt her chances at large? Because certainly she got her name in the paper and on the radio, but does it help her or hurt her?
Well, I don't know. I think districts are always safer than running at large. Mm-hmm. It's much easier to win a district than it is to win an at-large race. But let's face it, Charlotte is a liberal city. Mm-hmm. For the most part, it's a Democratic city, and Democrats typically pick up those seats.
You've also said that Justin Harlow's district, District 2, is the toughest district in the city to represent. He says that.
He says that.
Why?
Well, there's a lot going on in District 2. He calls District 2, and I'm paraphrasing here, the heart and soul of Charlotte's black community. But it's a district where you have a lot of activists. It's a district where you're seeing a lot of gentrification. For those unaware of the map, it's just kind of think of the Beatties Ford Road corridor, mm-hmm. Kind of writ large. So there's a lot of things going on there. The light rail line is being extended. There are some plans to take in some opportunity zone development in that area. And so some of the traditional residents in that area are understandably nervous. They're seeing their communities change right before their eyes. And I think what he was getting at is that that nervousness translates into communities that are more activist.
Yeah, and we, as you pointed out, I mean, they've even dubbed the West Side. They've given the West Side a new name. The city has
historic West End.
Yes, and they did that to brand it and bring it up in people's consciousness, and also to give it a new image, which may, if it works, increase development, and that always threatens housing. It bring as the boats rise, you may be squeezed out.
Absolutely, there are. If you talk to some of the community leaders in that area, people like Jatanya Adams, who actually heads the West End Partners, historic West End Partners. They talk about empty lots going for hundreds of thousands of dollars. That would have been a fraction of that just a few years ago.
Have any candidates emerged yet to replace the folks leaving in districts 2, 3, and 4? Steve.
So Malcolm Graham said yesterday he's in. He's going to run in District 2, and he served on city council 1999 to 2005, then became a state senator. And I assume there'll be a lot of other candidates because when Justin Harlow won 2 years ago, it was a really crowded field in the Democratic primary. And in the Democratic primary in any district, you don't need a lot of votes to win. It'll be in the hundreds, maybe a few thousand to put you over the top.
And I know that there are others who are looking at running who have not announced, but there's a lot happening behind the scenes, especially in District 2. And I would remind you that that the last primary, Harlow won that primary by 20 votes?
Yeah,
it's really close.
Really close election.
Okay. So the fate of Charlotte's storied Excelsior Club has been up in the air. We've talked about this before. The club is on the west side. It hosted some really, really big name acts like Nat King Cole and Louis Armstrong in its early years and during the time of segregation. And now Charlotte City Councilman James Mitchell wants the city to step up to save it from the wrecking ball.
There's so much momentum in that corridor. And I think it'd be a disservice if you drive by there and you see a bulldozer removing our history. And so I think it's the right thing to do. I cannot wave a magic wand and say at what level the city will participate.
So there may be a lot of people listening who are completely unfamiliar with the Excelsior Club and its storied history and why it's important to the African American community and why it should be important to the Charlotte community at large. It was founded in 1944. What did it mean in that time frame?
Well, it was one of the few places in this area, and indeed in the Southeast, where African Americans could go and get that type of entertainment. This was during the era of Jim Crow segregation, where blacks were not allowed in certain clubs or in
any clubs.
Yes. So they created their own. There was a Charlotte businessman, Jimmy McKee. He founded that club. It has changed hands a number of times since then. But it was a Charlotte institution, not just for entertainment at that time, but it was a meeting place. It was a symbol that, like so many of the other black businesses in that time, it was about ownership. It was about blacks owning something of their own that they were proud of.
It also came along at a time when nightclubs were the thing, black and white, all over the country. There were nightclubs where these performers came and you'd have dinner, and they would come out, and they'd do an intimate setting, and you would sing. Some very big people would be in rooms that sat no more than 100 people.
Right.
That kind of went away in the 60s and 70s. Is that when the decline of the Excelsior Club also began to occur because that went out of fashion?
Well, I think that signaled a transformation. The Excelsior Club, that part of it certainly did go away. But then it shifted. It became much more of a meeting space for the black community, for receptions, for get-togethers, political events. Though the function of it changed, I don't think the importance of it changed in the African American community. And if you talk to people now who remember that era, you will get an idea of just how important that little spot was to this community.
So James Mitchell, Councilman Mitchell, favors an approach involving the County Commission and the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Historic Landmarks Commission, but not private developers.
Yes.
Why?
Well, he doesn't want to see it fall into the hands of private developers. He believes that that developers will be driven, and correctly, by profit motive, and not necessarily doing what is necessarily best for the community. He wants residents to have a little more say in how that property would be used. Interestingly, he uses as an example what happened with Carolina Theater just around the corner. Mm-hmm. The city sold that property for, I believe, $1, and then came back later and and gave $4.5 million for renovations.
Well, this property is for sale right now. It's listed at $1.5 million. It's said to need about $400,000 in repairs to bring it up to code, contemporary code. Given those numbers, how likely is anybody, is that a bargain price given the Carolina Theater price?
Well, we know that, well, I'm not a real estate person, so I can't say what's a bargain price. And there are people who think that is a bargain price given what's happening in that corridor. There have been several offers, as one or two perhaps as high as $1 million. The owner turned those down. She believes that she can get 1.5.
She can get more. It's Charlotte Talks on WFAE. Maybe you know the answer to that question.
I could.
Will there be anybody biting at 1.5 plus $400,000 in necessary repairs, or will that have to be more a realistic number there?
Well, I think that this has been a sort of a point of contention. There's the people who say that she's asking for too much, and of course, when I've spoken to her, she points to what we were talking about earlier, the growth of that area, the growth and the change that's going to come to Beatties Ford Road corridor and the west side changes that have already been seen. But I think that there's also a sense of, should we be debating the price this much and when it could be demolished and bringing up the private investor debate, it could be demolished now as of Wednesday at any point. She doesn't plan to, but if somebody bought it, they could take it down in the private market, and of course the government wouldn't necessarily have that goal if they were to acquire it.
I think with any property, the market sets the value. So we can say what's too much or what's too little, but so far no one has stepped up to offer $1.5 million, or the property probably would have been sold. So to some degree, I think the market is saying that it might be overvalued, but on the other hand, perhaps private developers might be reluctant to take it on because it would really be a political firestorm if a private developer went in there and wanted to tear down that property.
And I was going to say, just one more thing. The club is in the Beatties Ford Road corridor, which is really hot, and a lot's going on there, but it's a little bit north. It's just north of the Brookshire Freeway in Washington Heights. So I think in terms of things happening right now, there's not a tremendous, it's a little bit to the south. So if you're a developer, this may be like a 5-year window for, it's coming, but it's not there in 2019, I think.
So, Maddie Marshall, who is president of the Washington Heights Community Association, recently pointed to the role played by government in historically isolating the black community from the rest of the world, and she told leaders, you owe us something. Is that something that resonates within the community, the black community? Is it something that's likely to resonate with leaders or with the community at large? You owe us something.
I think it's starting to resonate more, especially with the affordable housing discussions. There was a book, Color of Law, that came out that talked about the role that government played in segregating communities, whether it was blatant segregation or building highways through. And I think that's what she was referring to.
Glenn Berkins is editor-publisher of QCityMetro.com. He's here along with Daniel Shemtab, who is a growth and development reporter for the Charlotte Observer, and Steve Harrison from WFAE News. New leadership at the GOP, state GOP, and more when we come back. It's Charlotte Talks on WFAE.
For Daniel Stowe. Wow. All right, so only 2 4-packs of tickets to Daniel Stowe. If you're listening right now and you want those, you should call because they're probably going to go quickly. We do still have some tickets to see Charlotte Squawks. We've got the iHeart NPR Dog Lease, which has been really popular, and recognizing that WFAE encourages people to have a robust news diet. We also have a $20 per month contribution level, which would entitle you to either a subscription to the New Yorker magazine, and that comes every week, so that's a really great deal, or you can get a $20 per month contribution, and we'll send you a New York Times digital subscription. Learn more about all of that and the rules that we have for our $2,000 Lowe's gift card raffle at WFAE.org.
Again, a thank you gift at every dollar level because every dollar counts. Every dollar drives us closer to our finish line. We need your support. 704-549-9000. Make a contribution online at WFAE.org. Our operators are standing by. We have not heard the phone ring this break. We need to hear those calls coming in. You rely on Charlotte Talks. Can we rely on you?
Just $60,757 to go by 7 p.m. tonight. Can you make a contribution right now? 704-549-9000.
It's Charlotte Talks on WFAE and WFHE. I'm Mike Collins. It's the Local News Roundup. Steve Harrison is here from WFAE News. Daniel Shemtop from the Charlotte Observer. Glenn Brookins from QCityMetro.com. In a moment, we'll talk about new leadership at the GOP. But first, some other news from the week. Mark Carver is a free man a week after a Gaston County judge overturned his conviction for the 2008 murder of a UNC Charlotte student. He's now waiting to see if and when the Gaston DA will retry him for the death of Ira Yarmolenko, whose body was found on the banks of the Catawba River on the edge of Mecklenburg County. Carver says he's innocent, and last week a judge set aside his 2011 conviction because of ineffective counsel during his trial and questions about the DNA evidence prosecutors built their case on. Reporters waiting for Carver outside the Gaston County Jail on Tuesday asked how he felt about facing another trial.
Just take it one step at a time. That's all I can do, one day at a time. Yep.
Did you think this moment would come? I know we
I've
talked to
been
you
waiting.
while you were in. What's that?
I've been waiting.
Did you think it would happen?
Yeah, just took time.
District Attorney Locke Bell is adamant about Carver's guilt and plans to appeal the ruling overturning the conviction. Well, the state Republican Party has new leadership. Outgoing Chairman Robin Hayes has been charged with bribery. He's pleaded not guilty. The party has been plagued by the District 9 election fraud scandal. So last weekend they chose Michael Whatley from Gastonia as their new chair. What does he see as his party's priorities?
I think he sees the two main things, having North Carolina go red in 2020 for President Trump, and, of course, hosting a great convention in Charlotte to renominate the president. But there's a lot of, but like you said, Mike, they've had a bad run lately.
Yeah.
With the chairman being indicted.
And they also suffered in the midterms. They lost their supermajority in the legislature.
That's right. So he has his work cut out for him. And he beat narrowly, I think he got just over 50% of the vote at the convention in Concord last weekend.
Yeah. One of his challengers, who did not win, obviously, Jim Womack, said that the first thing the party had to do was to become branded as the party of faith, family, and fun. Is that a credible branding statement to anybody beyond the base?
Triple F, right? That's a great slogan, huh? I mean, I think that's just a bit of an unusual faith, family, fun. I'm not sure how much fun there is on either side.
In politics today. There's no fun in politics today. Well, BB&T, and speaking of fun, BB&T and SunTrust just announced after their merger, they're going to be changing their name. And they arrived at the new name, and they announced it this week. And the new name is, are you sitting down? Truist. How did they arrive at that, Danielle?
Well, they had thousands of names to choose from, and I'm sure a very expensive campaign to find it as well. But they've said that it represents their values towards truthfulness, and
they say it stays true to their legacy, and also ist is a superlative, so therefore they would be the best. Right?
I guess so. I think it's less the name and more the fact that we know the name now, we know where they're going, is really solidifying this merger that's assuming approved by the regulators to be the largest merger since the financial crisis.
A lot of companies now make up names. They search databases for names that have no meaning in any language, like Atrium. Well, that's not true. Verizon is one. Why? Why not just give it a combination of BB&T and SunTrust, or come up with a whole new name that makes sense generically for banking? This could be anything. Truist could be anything.
I think it's funny. I was talking to my colleague who covers banking. If you think about it, like a lot of the names that would be obvious or that would be good names, are taken. I mean, you have U.S. Bank, Bank of America, like a lot of the sort of straightforward names. So, I think another part of it is companies are really embracing this sort of trendy name, and it sounds trendy.
They also announced where they're going to put the bank in
Yes,
Charlotte.
yes, Hearst Tower.
And that's
Enough
right next
town.
door to Bank of America.
Yes. Well, interestingly, Bank of America is actually in the building that they're going to,
Right.
and they are going to leave the building.
So when will this change take place, this Truist name? When will it start popping up? Do we know?
I'm actually not sure about
Okay,
that.
all right. Ballantine announced a revamp this week to compete with trendy areas like South End. What do they have in mind?
They're envisioning, sort of a walkable town center neighborhood. They're actually going to build, or I believe the plan is eventually to build around 2,000 apartments and to actually turn the golf course, the public golf course there, into a park and to have essentially a pedestrian, retail, outdoor space type thing and an amphitheater as well.
So is this more like South End, which they referenced, or is it more like Brookdale Village?
That's a good question. Well, I think, I had thought about it like that before. I don't think it's supposed to be a shopping mall per se. I mean, when I say retail, I'm sure the
Live, work,
retailer,
play.
but yeah, live, work, play situation. Again, with the South End thing, it's easy to point out that competition because Lending Tree just last month announced they were leaving Ballantine, where they'd been for almost 2 decades, to go to South End because they, cited the light rail and the walkability. Ballantine tried to make a pitch for Amazon, didn't work out. Of course, we know there was a lot more involved with that effort in general, but they've sort of been trying to adapt to the needs of companies.
Go ahead.
I think it might be a stretch to compare it to South End for the simple reason that South End is really an extension of Uptown,
right?
And so you get that really cool amalgam of Uptown, but also this kind of funky residential area where you can live, you can dine
walk
out.
to restaurants.
Right, exactly. Ballantine, by its location, it's much more isolated.
Yeah.
So it's going to have to be much more self-contained in that way.
Well, they wanted to secede at one point, so maybe this is
That's right, the town,
Step one.
the town of Providence. Yes,
That's right.
But I was going to say one more thing about that. CATS is holding meetings now. They want to extend the Blue Line, which stops right now at I-45. They want to swing it down into Pineville by the mall, and then into Ballantine, and probably right in the middle of this new development. So, you would have, I guess, if you want to make the South End comparison, you would also have light rail.
Katz has a lot of big plans, which we've talked about in the past, from going to from Matthews to Belmont in Gaston County, and now Charlotte Area Transit has received what they described as an unsolicited proposal to redevelop the transportation center across from the arena. Who sent them the proposal, and what does it entail?
We know neither of those things. They didn't say who it's from, exactly what it is, other than that it would be a mixed use district. But it is worth noting that this has been on the radar of people in development for a while now. There have been, there's a Center City Vision Plan that talks about redeveloping the station. So I think that there are certainly goals to make this a more, modern transportation center.
So they've also said that a competitive proposal process for the transit center has begun. Was that in the works, or did this unsolicited proposal kickstart it?
I believe that the proposal kickstarted it from my understanding.
All right. Charlotte, USA, and Charlotte's got a lot. Those are two phrases that you've seen in advertising, or you've gotten off an airplane at Charlotte Douglas. There's usually big signs that talk about that. But neither of those slogans are good enough, evidently. They've been used in advertising, but the new head of the Charlotte Regional Business Alliance, which is the new combination of the Chamber and the Charlotte Regional Partnership, Janet Labar is her name, says the area lacks a brand and that one of her priorities will be to develop one. Did she provide any examples of how cities brand themselves elsewhere?
So this is not an example that she provided, but before she was here back in 2014, the what was then the chamber visited Nashville, and a big part of the discussion there was what is Charlotte's brand?
Their Music City.
Exactly. So developing something similar to that here. I mean, she did say what she doesn't think it should be, which is that she believes it should be more than just the financial hub of the South, which of course
it is
thrown around a lot.
But it is. Why run away from what you are?
Well, I think her argument was that it is the financial hub of the South, but that the economy has diversified much more than just
yes,
finance
but there's
and
more.
banking.
Yes, and there's more to Nashville than music. I mean, I'm.
I think one thing that's interesting about this is remember 10 years ago when the Hall of Fame, the NASCAR Hall of Fame, was getting ready to open, and there was this push. Pat McCrory, remember the phrase NASCAR Valley?
Not really, no.
Yes, well, there you go. See, but that was thrown out there as this slogan. There you go. There is your slogan that was floated and not used. So NASCAR Valley, it's free for anyone who wants it.
All right, well, Charlotte leaders are in Pittsburgh this week trying to learn some lessons about the Steel City. They do this every year. As you mentioned, they went to Nashville a couple of years ago. They've been to Miami. They've been to Dallas. Pittsburgh is a city that successfully transformed itself from a steel manufacturing, smoke-filled, dying blue-collar town and shifted to tech and healthcare. But they also lost population even as Charlotte gained it. They lost 2.3 million people as we gained 2.6 million people. They all move here. What happened? What do they hope to learn from Pittsburgh?
A big part of the conference, it would be remiss to not mention, is David Tepper, because that's where he grew up, and it's really been an opportunity from one of my colleagues is there for him to showcase kind of the development that he might want to see. I mean, he's talked about rapid trains around the state, and he talked as well about development around the stadium.
Yes, because they replaced Three Rivers Stadium with these two stadiums, one
Yes.
for baseball, one for football, and evidently they're a half mile apart, and a lot of development has grown up around those two stadiums.
Yes.
Okay, so that's what he's interested in.
Yeah, I mean, there's no concrete plans, but that was sort of the vision that
yes,
they
there
were.
are. You just don't
Nothing we know about then.
That's right.
Let's put it that way.
All right, several years ago, Charlotte was shocked to learn that we ranked 50th out of 50 cities in terms of economic mobility, and ever since we have been racing to correct that. And now, Brian Collier with the Foundation for the Carolinas says he believes that time has passed.
I don't really talk about the 50th of 50 thing anymore because I just believe that was a point in time, and I honestly don't know that I believe that we're 50th of 50 in the country anymore.
Wow. You wrote this week, Steve, that it may be a while before we know if upward mobility, economic mobility, has improved in Charlotte. You asked, what if Charlotte's mobility has already improved? What if it's gotten worse? And you report that Mayor Pro Tem Julie Eiselt retorted, I think that's a great question. What are the metrics? So aside from that Harvard study, which put us 50th, what are the metrics? And are they the only arbiter of that?
So yeah, that was what the story was about. It was just this. Since that Harvard study that put us 50 out of 50, there's been a huge civic push to do something and to improve economic mobility. But as of now, there are no plans. I think the Harvard study may come back and take and look again at children born around this time, 2017, 2018, 19, and look forward 30 years. But that's an awfully long time to know whether what we're doing now is working. And so it was just I thought the story was interesting in that that we're kind of in a dark room and we're kind of feeling things around.
So are we moving on? Are we
I think there's still a huge push, and I think there is. I think that there's still a big effort. But it was just kind of, I think, an interesting point of like, we'll never really know. All of us,
right? We won't be
here when we get an answer to whether it's worked.
It's Charlotte Talks and the Local News Roundup on WFAE. When Democratic Mecklenburg County Sheriff Gary McFadden took office, he ended the sheriff's voluntary participation with ICE in the 287G program. Now Republican State Senator and congressional candidate Dan Bishop has called on the sheriff to resign over what he called his reckless policies, but he pinned that characterization to the release of a Honduran man arrested on domestic violence charges. What's the story there?
Well, I think the call for the sheriff to resign. This comes in the middle of a political campaign.
He's
It's
called for Dan McCready, the Democrat.
Exactly.
Also call for
exactly, and that was the real point of that. I think this has become a very contentious issue. I think people can see merit on both sides. In the state legislators have gotten involved, proposing remedies that would.
Yes, because Sheriff McFadden's not the only sheriff in town who has said no to ICE on this 287G program.
All of the sheriffs representing the major cities have said no.
And Caldwell County State Senator Destin Hall has co-sponsored legislation requiring sheriffs to cooperate with ICE.
The sheriff's job is to protect the community, and if some of these folks don't want to do that, then we here at the General Assembly will do what we need to do to make sure that those policies are stopped.
How likely is that to pass? How much support does that legislation have? Do we know?
I think the big change is the Sheriff's Association now supports it.
Why? That's a change. Why?
Yeah, under the previous legislation, it was just kind of a blanket requirement. They unanimously opposed it. Now they've tweaked the bill to say that that the detainer request will go before a magistrate, and they feel that that there will be like an actual judicial order to detain for 48, 96 hours.
We close today with something sweet. They say the neon lights are bright on Broadway, and they're about to get brighter when the Hot Donuts Now sign lights up on the Great White Way. Krispy Kreme is planning to open a location in Times Square early next year. Last time I checked, Times Square was at 45th and Broadway, but this is going to be at the corner of 48th and Broadway with stadium-style seating so you can have great seats, a donut theater experience to watch them make the donuts, and the world's largest Hot Now light. It's Broadway. Now, they've had great lines around the block in places like Dublin, Ireland, but this is Dunkin' Donuts territory. Will they be successful? I have 10 seconds.
Yes.
Okay. That yes from Steve Harrison from WFAE, Daniel Shemtab with us from the Charlotte Observer, Glenn Perkins from QCityMetro.com. Thanks for the hour.